Right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another GoDaddy Pro meetup. My name is Marcus Burnett, and I'm on the GoDaddy Pro team. Today, I have a couple of people joining me to talk about their experiences selling their businesses and some ways that you can grow your business if you're looking for the same outcome. Before I get to introducing them, though, I just wanted to let everyone know here that I will be monitoring the chat. So if you're joining us here in the event, feel free to post your questions. We'll take a look at those as we go along. Also, this is being recorded, and a replay of the event will be available within a day or so of the end of the event. It will be posted to the event page and GoDaddy Pro's YouTube channel, and also emailed out to the email address that you registered with. So with that, I will go ahead and get us started here. First up, we have Becca Rice, Senior Director of Product Management at GoDaddy. Becca was a key part of the SkyVerge and Jilt acquisition by GoDaddy in late 2020 and now leads a team of people that work on GoDaddy's managed WooCommerce product. She's spoken at many WordCamps and conferences and is passionate about the WordPress community. How are you doing today, Becca?
I'm doing well. It's great to see you all. So thanks for folks attending the webinar in real time. It's good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also have Cory Moss, president of Gelform, Inc. Cory has developed and sold a couple of different projects, the Birdie, a personal finance tracker, and Kanban for WordPress, a Kanban plugin for WordPress sites. How are you doing today, Cory?
I'm good. You get to see my little dog, and I'm trying to keep him from licking himself in the background. This is always the joy of doing live video here.
It's how coworkers go.
That's right. I read or heard somewhere that today is National Puppy Day or something like that anyway, so I think that that's appropriate.
Okay, well, there. Good. We're on theme. Glad I could help.
You've both sold projects and businesses, but of course, everyone's experience is going to be a bit different. I'm hoping that we can take this time here today to talk a little bit about how you got here and some of the things that people may want to think about if they're interested in selling as well. So I do have a handful of questions or so that we'll go through and kind of keep us headed in a direction. Again, if people have questions in the chat, I will keep an eye on that as well for people to interject. But first, maybe tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you got into WordPress. Maybe Cory, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I've been building for the web for almost 25 years now, and started as a designer and implementer, or cutting up PSDs back in the 90s, because that's what you did. But I really liked how interactive websites quickly became, and wanted that on my website. So, taught myself JavaScript, and then taught myself programming. And in the early 2000s, also caught the entrepreneur, the SaaS bug, inspired by 37 Signals and Joel Spolsky and kind of that first wave of software as a service. And so I've had this long parallel of building websites and building web apps, both for clients and for day jobs and such, but also in an attempt to start businesses and run businesses and, build SaaS apps. And then been in the WordPress space for 10 or 11 years. And those kind of came together with Kanban WP. So building a Trello or, a Kanban app, but that could be hosted by WordPress. And now it's sort of a point of fascination for me to use WordPress as a platform, but to host SaaS apps and run SaaS apps. So I've, lots of sort of overlapping circles there.
Yeah, that makes sense. 25 years, a nice long time. I remember those PSD slicing days for sure. Becca, why don't you tell us a little bit about your history?
Yeah, I try to forget those PSD slicing days. But,
yeah, they weren't the most fun.
No, power to you, Cory. That's an awesome history in the web space. Mine was very different. I didn't start out in this space. I came out of college as a high school teacher, teaching high school chemistry. So I got into WordPress by using it. I kind of used it for some projects in college, but really started running a site when I was teaching. And I used WordPress to power my classroom website, as well as I was coaching sports. So we used it for, our sports teams as well. And that was actually what got me into software development. I remember, the very first thing I wanted to do was put a table on a web page for, my team roster. And you couldn't do that in WordPress at that time with the, TinyMC editor. And I dropped into the code editor and was like, oh my God, what just happened, right? And so at that point, I started learning HTML and CSS, and then you progress into PHP, right? And then you sort of just discover that whole chain of the different technology stacks that power a WordPress site. So very quickly after that, a couple of years later, then is how I got involved in SkyVerge. And so started working with Maass and Justin in, writing user documentation. And from there, helping with pre-sales questions and customer support, and then kind of found my way then into the product path. After you become the one who's built up all that customer context, from documentation and answering questions and, getting deep into that problem space. And I also ran a site for a long time called sellwithwp.com that sort of led me into using a lot of different products. So I kind of fell into product management as a result of that, and using WordPress. And then as our business grew at SkyVerge, we got much further then into, hosted applications and SaaS apps. We built a number of apps for the Shopify space, as well as, being one of the earliest folks building WooCommerce plugins. And then, really got to intersect a lot of those different experiences, where we then built Jilt, which was an email marketing app that was cross-platform. So that was a hosted SaaS app with connectors for Shopify, with WooCommerce, with, EDD and a number of other systems. So I've stayed in WordPress and stayed in Woo for a long time, but I've also been in, the SaaS and hosted software space as well. And that was what brought us to GoDaddy, was that sort of very unique kind of confluence of different expertise and capabilities.
I feel like that entrance into the WordPress space by using it, loving it, and then deciding to, follow that career path of building sites is quite common. But I don't know if that many people push beyond that and say, well, I don't want to just develop sites for clients. I want to develop products for WordPress and WooCommerce. And so you just went all in. You were like, I like this. I like using this thing as a teacher, and I don't just want to build sites. I want to build products for other people to build sites. So just push right on past.
I turn everything up to 11. It's both an extreme benefit and an extreme personality flaw.
See it going both ways.
Yeah.
You shared a little bit already, both of you have, but can you share a little bit about the products or businesses that you sold, and tell us a little bit about whether you knew that you wanted to sell from the beginning or not, whether that was something that kind of snuck up on you. Were you building a product to sell, or were you building a product that you happened to sell? Go ahead, Cory.
So the Birdie was a little app that I built probably 10 years ago, more now, that sent you an email a day and said, what did you buy today? And you would reply just listing the things. And obviously you could sign into the website, and eventually I made a little mobile app. But the premise was really that it came to you. And so this was early days of lifehacker.com. And so it got listed on Lifehacker pretty early, which led to a pretty nice adoption by a lot of people. And the interesting coincidence, so at that time, mint.com was one of the few personal finance apps, but it required you to sign into all of your accounts, and it linked to all of your banks and credit cards and stuff. And we here in the West take for granted that people have credit cards and bank accounts and stuff like that. And so I learned a lot about, one of my favorite emails was a guy in, I think, Bangladesh, who was like, thank you. I finally have a personal finance app, because here we don't have bank accounts, you know. So it grew and grew and grew. But two things that led to me selling it. One was, I was as I was a decent web developer, but had limited experience with scaling. And so started to experience a lot of scaling issues, because it was all about sending out these emails, thousands and thousands of emails. And I never could figure out how to finance it, because sort of the whole point was that you weren't spending money. So why would you spend, $5 a month on this app, and so I started trying to slam in, extra features that nobody really wanted, nobody was asking for. And it got to the point where I just needed to not have it on my plate anymore, because it was taking up more and more time. And again, this is 10 years ago. So a lot of the services that we take for granted were either didn't exist, for scaling, and especially for cloud services. Either they didn't exist, or they were, because it was early days, they were very expensive. And so I'm spending more and more of my own money for this little app. And then life happened, and I was moving and a bunch of stuff, and I just wanted it off my plate. So I put it on Flippa and sold it for, I think, 8,000, something like that. So not a lot, but it made no money. But sold it to a guy who was doing well with a personal finance blog, just pure content and running ads and stuff like that. But then bad coincidence, what was it? Google Penguin came along and totally destroyed his blog. And so, and so sadly, the birdie fell out of the sky and got hit by a car. And I'm sad, because, and so the one other funny thing about the birdie was, I had bought thebirdie.com on a whim, because I was going to build a Twitter client that nobody had asked for, and the internet did not need another Twitter client. And so I just had this domain sitting around. And so I originally used it just as a placeholder, but it quickly, a nice coincidence that it worked well. This was because this was a personal finance tracker that was email. It was very gentle. It was very easy. It was very non-technical. And so having a little mascot, tell the birdie what you bought today, all sort of fit together. So it was just like a nice little,
I was going to ask what the significance behind the name was. I like that it was the domain you had available.
And so cute. I found a free logo, of a little bird, and so I contacted the guy who designed it. I found it on, I don't remember, Stock Unlimited or one of those. And so I contacted him, and I paid, I think, $100 to have him make it more mine. And we gave him a little cheap, as in CHEAP.
Nice.
We love a pun. So anyway, that was the birdie. And then years later, built a Kanban plugin for WordPress out of need. I worked at a startup. We wanted something like Trello, but we didn't. I don't remember why, but we didn't want Trello. So I banged together a plugin, grew it over time. But I'm your typical developer where I just can't market to save my life. And so it grew to about 20,000 a year at its peak, with subscriptions. And then the product had some scaling issues, because I built it in jQuery, and then I just, again, sort of stumbled over a few years of, it should get redone in React. I don't know React. Let me learn React. I just couldn't, and I really couldn't get out of my own way as far as marketing, but I could never grow it to earn enough money to hire somebody to do the marketing. And so there was sort of a catch-22 that I think a lot of developers fall into, of either I need to become a marketing expert, you know, in order to make more money to hire a marketer, you know, but I'm a developer anyway. And so with that one, it had just sort of been treading water for at least a couple of years. And then I saw Keanon on Post Status mentioning that he and his team or his company were looking for plugins to buy. And I said, maybe it's just time. And so he and I had met in Nashville at WordCamp US a couple of years previous. So we, you know, got to chatting. It wasn't quite what he was looking for, but in the end, he decided it was a good fit. And so there it had sales had fallen down to about, I think about $1,000 a month recurring revenue. And so I just used the old, you know, 12 to 24 months of revenue to determine what your selling point. I said, it's okay, somewhere in the middle. So 15,000, and, you know, gave him all the assets and as many docs as I could, you know, hand him and all that stuff. And he took over.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it sounds like neither of them were really, you know, on your radar to sell from the very beginning. They were just products that you wanted to build and ended up working out that way. Becca, how about you with SkyVerge and Jilt? What's the story there, and was selling always a plan from the beginning?
Yeah, it definitely was not part of the plan. I'd say that, you know, we would never say never. But we built the company with the intention that, you know, we bootstrapped it, we were going to grow it, we were going to run it, you know, for as long as we wanted to, right? And at which point, you know, then maybe you hire a CEO or something. But when we started down that path, you know, that informed a lot of the decisions that we made, right? We built it, you know, with a very strong focus on, you know, you're marrying this team and this company, right? So build a culture you want, build a place you want to work at. And, you know, there's that old adage that the best time to sell is when you don't want to sell, right? If anyone wants to sell, you know, you're probably not in the best position to do it. And so I'd say that was definitely true for us. We were always open to the idea. We always had the conversations with folks, you know, as those conversations arose. But we were never really interested in making that jump. I think one thing that we did do well in hindsight, and I know Syed had been a proponent of this well, is always making sure that you're set up for that kind of thing, right? Where you have, like, you know, very clear accounting and bookkeeping, and, you know, you have that structure that's required to make your business saleable, even if you don't intend to. So we were in that position, but we didn't really consider it. And then when we, you know, had these discussions with other companies, the conversation we had with GoDaddy at that time was one where we were really interested in the product vision and the things that were happening inside the company. And so, you know, like I said, we always took those conversations. I think it is important to be open to it. And then we were like, actually, you know, we could see ourselves doing this and joining this team and working in this direction, given where we've been trying to go as a team and as a company. So I'd say that we certainly did not, you know, start out with that intention at all. But I am glad that we had gotten advice over time to make sure that you do think about, you know, your business being saleable, and that you do have those conversations with folks as they arise, to keep the doors open for relationships, for, you know, if you did find a need for investment, right? If there's some purpose to it, make sure you have, you know, those conversations at hand that you can refer back to. And so I'd say that, you know, for the folks here, even if you're not thinking about that for your business, or you're not sure that you would want to sell your business, it's still important to have that sort of hygiene around the structure and the bookkeeping, and, you know, making sure that you have very clean systems around, you know, payroll, around accounting, around your corporate structure, et cetera, going forward. And I know that was a big benefit to us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I take for granted, or take, there's a great book called The E-Myth, standing for entrepreneurship. And it's now an older book, and the model that they talk through is a woman who's trying to grow a bakery. But within that, one of the main concepts is the mentor tells the baker to treat the business like she's going to franchise it, even if she's not. Right. So it's a metaphor for providing the objectivity that says, write down all of your processes, systemize everything that you can, treat it as though you're eventually not going to be the one doing every single job, because if your company grows, you can't be the one that's doing every single job. So, so very good advice. Like, I always make sure whenever I start a new project, I get a new Gmail account for that project that nobody ever sees, but I use that Gmail account for creating a Mailgun account and a bank account and so that down the road, it makes a little more overhead for me for signing in and out of things. But that way down the road, being able to just hand over the credentials to a Gmail account and a list of accounts that they can then sign into is totally worth the little bit of overhead up front and whatnot. And so, like Becca said, clean accounts, clean bookkeeping, well-documented everything, huge difference for me.
Yeah. Were there, I guess, to flip the coin, were there times for either of you along the way where you were maybe against selling and were thinking, this is my baby, this is what I'm gonna, build forever or whatever, and didn't even think about the potential of selling it at some point?
I think I was like
so
that.
Loud you could probably hear me.
I was going to say that. I think we were like that up into the point where the deal's inked, right? I think most people who are entrepreneurs, certainly understand this, where you don't always start a business with the intention that you want to sell your business. You start a business because you want to run a business, right? And it's a very different mindset. And I'm sure that there are folks who enter something with the idea of, I'm going to make a quick flip, or I'm going to try to scale and sell, or something like that, right? Where an exit is the point. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's not the reason most of us do what we do, right? And so I think we, at least in my case, we certainly felt like that. That again, it's always a conversation that's welcome, right? Because the worst thing that happens is you say no, and we certainly had no problem with saying no over time, right? But I think we all have part of us that wants to always keep building. And that was part of, at least in my case, why the deal was attracted to us, because we were going to be continuing to build and continue to sort of accelerate a vision that we were all very excited about. And Cory, I think, it sounds like you were probably in a similar boat, right? What was your sort of emotional reaction to it or thinking around it?
Yeah, it broke my heart the first time, because it was a huge blow to my ego and pride that I was failing and that I wasn't going to be able to do better. And I just wasn't. I was in a position, and and especially where there was no money coming in, I had failed. And so I could either just turn it off or I could sell it. And so the process, and the buyer was fine. But it was I think this is an important lesson that I've learned, is that it was very, very tied up into my identity and my personality and my pride, like I said. And so, the selling came out of failure. And with the second one, it was less tied to my identity. Also, like I said, it had floated for a couple of years. And so I had more objectivity by then. And then selling it to somebody great. Kianon's awesome. Well known in the community, like when we talked, it very much aligned. I knew he was going to take care of my customers. And so it was not as difficult. But I still definitely, so I won't, it technically was a fail on my part, or I was failing, or I was going to continue to fail, but it didn't hurt at all. It was a realization that I wasn't going to be able to, had taken it as far as I could go.
I dig that you brought up the emotional piece of it, because that was one thing when we did actually get more serious about thinking about selling, talking to other founders that, we had known who had had exits in the past. And a lot of people said that they feel a lot of grief, right? And I think there was an article I was just reading about this on the guy that sold Wunderlist to Microsoft as well, right? Talking about
I bet he's regretted that every day since.
That was basically what the article was about, right? Was that he was, he was depressed about it and had this sense of grief, right? Because you do have part of your identity, you do have so much investment in what you've built, that when you sell it, there's a part of you that I think is shocked by that, right? And so I think that is also something to consider. I think it doesn't. You still have to think through your decision regardless of what your emotional reaction is going to be. But I think it is one that people probably aren't necessarily thinking about or aware of, that's a process that a lot of people go through, right? Is that grief of I've invested a lot of myself into something, whether it's tied to my identity or not, and now it's not mine anymore.
Yeah, I think it would be fairly safe to say that as a founder, there's some level of control that you're used to and enjoy having as well. And coming to the realization that you don't have full control, regardless of whether you're, selling it entirely, or in the case of SkyVerge, joining up still and becoming, part of GoDaddy and still being involved in the projects and stuff. There's still a level of control that you have to give up, and coming to, just grips with that, I'm sure is something that you have to deal with as well.
100%.
Yeah, I'm an only child. I generally, I've learned to play well with others, but it's not my natural state. I'm a musician, and I never really flourished in bands. I make music on my own, and so I look forward to partnering with somebody, but but the roles need to be clear. Their roles, they're marketing and sales, and I'm happy to enable them to do their thing, but I'm over here building the product. So control is a big thing, or it's not even control. It's like, I don't have to control it, but it's ownership. And seeing that drift away. I think the most heartbreaking thing was, like I said, when the birdie started to like falter, and, having sold to a non-technical person, and he was faltering and couldn't be bothered. And I don't blame him, because it wasn't the primary part of his business. And having people email me directly and say, like, can I still get my data? And I was like, secretly still signing in, because he had never changed the password, so that I could like help the random person out, anyway. So that part was sad, but again, so I've sort of had a not great experience, and then a very good experience.
Yeah, I think it tells you that if you do decide to go down that path, you have to commit to the decision fully, right? And to be at peace with it. And I think, there's a lot of great things that can happen from that, right? Especially if you are in a position where you do want to, move on to a different product, or, you feel like you can't take something to where it needs to go, where you're joining a bigger mission, right? Whatever the reason for selling is, you have to make your emotional peace with it, I think. And it's not a process you can shortcut. So it's something where if you're thinking about going down that path, no matter whether it's just you in your business, or, there's a small team around it, that you have to really fully, I think, commit to the decision. Like, yeah, if I'm going to sell, then X, Y, and Z are going to happen, and I have to be okay with those things.
And the other piece I'd say to reconcile with is, that's tied into that, is the price. And so, like, I think your acquisition was a hell of a lot bigger than mine. And I had, thankfully, I'd gone to a conference years ago, and trying to get time frame, 2009-ish. So the whole startup thing was in full boom, and still kind of in its first wave. And so you were only ever hearing, startup porn, these huge numbers, millions and billions, and all that kind of stuff. And I met a guy at the conference, and everybody's talking about their big products and their big acquisitions and what they're worth and yada yada. And I'm over here kind of worth. I was sleeping at the hostel and walking every day to the conference because I couldn't begin to afford the hotel. I sat down at one of the dinners, and this guy said, we got chatting, and he described that he had built a piece of software that basically an API that tied one piece of software for one company to another piece of software for another company. And at the end, he had sold it for a few $100,000, which was still, and is not way big, still way bigger, as you've heard, than either of the businesses I've sold. But it at least put into context for me, like, oh, there's acquisitions of all sizes. And so I think, like the birdie, I was like, I'm going to grow this to a $9 million, and then I sold it for, a few thousand. I didn't have my hopes up. I didn't have expectations about millions, but there's a big discrepancy. Like, now I will brag that I sold a business for $7,000 at the time. That, arguably was a point of shame, because that's not what you read on Hacker News every day. And so I think that's the other thing too, is like, now I understand that these are assets. If you can grow it to millions, obviously that's fantastic. But I also, at some point, I quote this frequently. I never can remember where I heard it, but somebody was being interviewed on a startup podcast, and he was talking about all the different products he had, and the host said, well, how are you going to get to $1 million? And the other guy said, well, what if I had 1 million startups that each made $1? And again, obviously an exaggeration, but it's this is cool. This is okay. Like, you could turn these over. And now I'm, me personally, like I'm often looking for little side projects that I might someday sell for some thousands. It doesn't have to be millions, in addition to the day job. Like, I'm a freelance web developer. I probably always will be. I really enjoy it. Yes, I have aspirations for the lifestyle business, so-called. And, someday, sure, I'll be that guy driving a Tesla, and, probably not, but, you get my point, that it's like, there's all kinds. And I like it's becoming, I think, more of a norm. I'm seeing on Twitter that people are starting little businesses or little products and then selling them for a little bit of money, and learning and growing. And maybe it's a one-time thing, and maybe it's a thing they do over and over again, but that's becoming more normalized. It's okay. It's not, there's not shame around any price. If you sell it for $50, cool. That's $50 you didn't have yesterday,
Yeah. I was going to say, I think probably it's just watered down a bit. There's the multi-million-dollar sales or whatever are the ones that get spread everywhere. But I would venture to guess that by volume number of sales being made, that, the lesser than that is going to be far more sales than, the multi-million-dollar ones. So it's just not the ones that are making headlines.
Having done, I've done a few of those, right? And a lot of companies that start to scale have, and they're great deals. They have a far lower amount of diligence, typically associated with them. Like, those kind of transactions happen a lot. I think way more than people realize. We had done, I think, at least 3 or 4 of those small acquisitions. Actually, more than that, if you include some of the plugins we bought. We bought 4 different Shopify apps, as well as a number of WooCommerce plugins. And so those deals happen all the time, and they're excellent ways to grow and learn, and also as an entrepreneur, understand what you might be interested in or not interested in, what you do want to commit to growing for the long term.
Yeah, just harping back a little bit on the loss of ownership or whatever. There's also the flip side, where you also do gain some freedom, which is probably hard to see at the time, but giving that up does open you up to being able to work on other things, pursue other things. And like you were saying, Cory, if you have a handful of those, then that's just as good as one larger sale, you know.
Let's talk price a little bit. That's probably interesting for folks, right? You know, there is that
Sure.
huge gamut of prices, right? So how do you think about pricing? How do you get better prices? How do you structure something? I think, you know, from our end, having bought a few of those smaller apps and then having, been involved then in selling, I think one thing that is important is to think about the revenue structure of your business. And so, like, you know, Cory, like you were saying, we're not necessarily making money with, like, you know, Birdie, and you're thinking about infrastructure and how you're going to monetize or whatever. The way you monetize is important. And when you talk about a lot of that SaaS porn, right, to use your word, a lot of the reason you see those multiples, I think it's important to think about, is the dependability of revenue that recurs. Right. And so if you're running an agency, for example, where you have to have deal flow in your pipeline, and that, you know, revenue certainty isn't necessarily guaranteed and could be turned off without the same care and attention paid to that deal pipeline, that's going to be valued differently than, you know, a business where you do have customers who are already acquired and they're on a subscription and that revenue is recurring and more dependable and reliable. That's going to be valued at a higher multiplier. And so if you are thinking about going down that path, I think the way you structure the revenue you have is important to think about, where, you know, if let's say you offer services via an agency, think about, you know, can I offer any of these services in a more productized way? Can I offer maintenance retainers, right? How do I think about the revenue that I already get and optimizing that revenue if I am going to sell this at some point, or if I'd be open to selling it at some point? And not only that, it forces you to build a better business. So Cory, I'm curious, you know, how you thought about that. Even I think pre-revenue or non-revenue is maybe a separate topic to talk about, but from a you know, revenue driving business perspective, what were the things that you thought about?
Yeah, the one of the specific things that I'll bring up is I often get asked about lifetime licenses. So Kanban WP specifically, you know, was a WordPress plugin, and um, offered a lifetime license. Um, and you know, how did that factor in? And obviously, like, that's money that I kept. So, you know, when you sell a business, you sell all the assets and you essentially draw a line in the sand, or I guess I should say, this was my experience. You know, we picked a date, and basically any money that came in up to that date was mine. And then any money that came in after that date was theirs, because, you know, at that point, officially they owned the business.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I got to keep all of the lifetime licenses that they now have to support. And with my new plugin, Social Link Pages, which is a simple little page builder inside WordPress, which sounds bizarre, but you know, kind of like a link tree or a card. So meant with specifically for social sort of link in bio scenarios. I put it on AppSumo Marketplace almost immediately after launch. And a lot of people have sort of asked me about that. So that part of why I bring it up, because I know it's a point of interest for a lot of people, is that it was a great way to get the first few $1,000s, you know, through the door. But then I turned it off pretty quickly. Once I felt like, okay, I've got a little bit of traction, I've got a little momentum, I've got some users, you know, and I will happily support those, I don't know, 20, 30 sales, maybe more, 50 anyway, you know, but it's like not going to be a big portion of my overall customer base. But it helped me get started. You know, those were a lot of them were my first sales. So that's something to think about. And then, frankly, I think because I hope that adds a little bit of value, because I don't have a good answer for your question. I guess I'm dodging your question there. But it's, you know, because I didn't set out to sell initially, I didn't think about a lot of those things. And I think because I specifically found myself in the situation where I was like, okay, I'm ready to hand over the keys to somebody and walk away and not think about it. I didn't have a lot of opportunity to look for extra, you know, places of revenue or places. I certainly fished around for value. you know, to make the job or the not job listing, the selling listing, real estate listing essentially look better. But then I mean, in part, I want the product to succeed. You know, I'm not resentful about selling it, and I love the product and I loved my customers and I wanted them to succeed. And so, you know, it was actually fun to get on a call with Cannon and be like, you know, and I've got t-shirts and I've got buttons and I'm going to ship it all to you. And so, yes, I'm going to charge you 15,000 plus $40 in shipping and handling. You know, but wait, there's more. And I shipped him everything that I could, because I want him to go to WordCamps post-pandemic. I sold it pre-pandemic, but you know, when we get back to it, like I want him to be able to, out of the box, you know, set up a booth and be successful, that kind of thing. So, yeah, that's what I have to say about that. I don't think I answered the question at all, but there's a bunch of stuff.
No, I mean, all different ways of thinking about it, right? I think there's certainly different ways we had thought about it, right? So we had sold a suite of Shopify apps, for example, when we wanted to double down on Jilt and knew that we didn't have the attention and focus to be able to do all of those things very well. And when we were in that position, for example, we knew there were revenue opportunities that we could have hit, right, to make it look better in a sale. We positioned the sale as part of that. Like, here, you know, 3 strategies we think could really optimize the revenue. We just don't have the engineering to invest in making them happen, right? But I think if you were, you know, in a position where you're like, oh, I think I might want to sell my business, right? That kind of brainstorming is important, and you know, I think also helpful to think about how you might implement those things, and maybe it makes your business a game changer, and then you don't want to sell again, right? But I think that exercise is an interesting one for business owners, and you know, for the folks who are attending, if you know, even if you don't run a product business, if you run an agency or a different kind of business, I think just helpful exercises, right? Like, what if I did need to get revenue that was recurring instead of, you know, worrying about my deal pipeline? How would I think about that? Or how would I think about automating the deal pipeline, right? By using, you know, let's say better referrals from my existing clients. And so thinking about selling your business can also be a really cool way to improve your business.
And even backing up a step, one of the things that I learned, because like I said, the birdie was early on, and certainly early on in my journey, one of the things that I learned or came to understand, I'd read it in a dozen books, but it hadn't really resonated. But it was, you know, like I said, I had my guy in Bangladesh. I had a grandmother somewhere in the US, you know, who was really excited and messaged me often, sometimes more often than I would have liked. But, you know, I was very conversational with a lot of my users. And so I got to the point where I really wanted them to succeed. And I think that translates into, had the business been earning any money, you know, their success would have equaled revenue for me. And so a phrase that I used at one point was, you know, I finally get, like, if I thought that I could make my customers more successful and subsequently the business more successful by writing a book instead of running a website, I would have. And so I think it's, you know, the looking at, you know, how to make your customers succeed is another good exercise, in the same vein as, if I understand you correctly, the, like, you know, looking for other ways to generate revenue, looking for other ways to optimize revenue, and looking for, you know, all those sorts of things. And I think a lot of it does come back to that same sort of idea, like I said, that I learned from the E-Myth that I always come back. You know, if I were going to sell this, here's all the ways that I would optimize it. Or even looking at it from the other direction of, like, it's any trick that lets you look at a business objectively, right? So that you can optimize it, you can make it the best business, and remove that emotional thing, that emotional aspect that we talked about.
Yeah, I think too, though, it's optimization is maybe not the right connotation there, right? It's about, like, you know, how do I find the win-wins, right? I need to win, and my customers need to win, because everybody's got to eat. So if I can't make money and I can't pay my team, right, then, my business isn't going to be here for the long term. So we both need to win. It needs to be sustainable to the point where it makes sense for customers to pay for it. And it makes sense for me to run it, right? And so if I'm thinking about selling it, somebody else has to do that same calculus, right? Where it needs to make sense for them to run it, and it makes sense for customers to continue to pay for it under those new conditions. And so I think that exercise is important, regardless of whether you want to sell or not. It's a prerequisite to be able to sell. But I think, for you as the business owner, important to sort of take that, unimpassioned or more objective look.
Well put.
Disimpassioned, unimpassioned.
One of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the
when I need it.
Not passioned.
Yeah.
Not passioned. Yeah. One of the questions that I had that I kind of skipped over anyway was just what you all were looking for in a potential buyer. And it sounds like the ability for your customers to continue to benefit strongly weighed into both of your decisions to sell as well, that there was a plan going forward. I know in the case of Birdie, it maybe didn't quite work out that way. But it still sounds like that was on your mind as you were doing that. You wanted to keep the project going so that the people who were already signed up, already using that, would be able to continue and not just let that, go away. Were there any other things, I guess, that either of you looked for in a potential buyer? Employee security, I guess, in your case, Becca, or the company's values, knowing the company and the people of the company that you were selling to?
Yeah, in our case, there were a few things. One was we needed to be able to continue to serve the customers we had. We felt like we made a commitment to them, and it was important to honor that commitment. And the second was to our team, which is everybody has to have a job, right? And we wanted to be very clear about that, as that may or may not be important to other people selling the business, right? But for us, it was. And so not necessarily putting a value judgment on it, but we had built a team. We cared about the team. We wanted to make sure the team had positions if they wanted them. And then the third thing we evaluated was both like product and team fit. So does the culture of this business and its core values align with ours? We didn't expect the culture to be exactly the same, and that was okay, but the things we cared about and valued needed to be aligned together. And we found really good alignment then in our core values, which kind of filtered down into the product, where the product's going. If you're serving customers well and you value the same things, then it's way easier, more natural to find alignment in what you're trying to do with the products and where you want to go together. That is different than you might be, a trajectory you might be on individually. So, that was way more important to us than any other part of deal consideration or price or whatnot. Was, we're not looking for a sell and leave, right? I'm still here, right? We were looking for sell and alignment and accelerate and keep building. So I think the calculus might change for other people, but since we knew we wanted to join the company, those were all things that were really important to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I'm taking away from this conversation is like you and I had two very different situations,
absolutely.
and both sold. And so it's
different styles.
Yeah. They're different styles, things that you're looking for, different needs, different, none of these things look the same. And so it just depends, which is the worst answer to anything. But I think it's again, because I feel like so many people these days looking to sell businesses have been influenced by Hacker News and Entrepreneur Magazine and all the top of the pyramid, essentially. But the likelihood, like you said, is that the majority of what goes on are these probably smaller sales. There isn't one true way to do it, and it's not always going to look like the sale of some huge company to another huge company or what have you.
Yeah, I personally think that's the benefit of having both of you on. I think it's so easy to think, well, there's a set, there's a guideline somewhere that shows, exactly the steps I need to take for every single business ever. And that's just not going to be the case. That's going to be different based on, who you are as a business, who you're selling, who the company is or the person is that you're selling to, what your intention is, whether you're selling because you need to, free up your time to do something else, or whether you're selling to be acquired and continue on the journey together and all of that. And so having, both of you sort of talk to your different experiences, I think is a huge benefit.
One of the,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, real quick. One of the
Yeah.
advantages, I think, of building businesses in the context of the WordPress ecosystem is that there's a lot of individuality, and there's a lot of people making it up as they go along. And there's a lot of people going, no, I don't want my business to look like every other business. And I've very much been influenced by that, of like, it's okay to have side hustles that just make a little bit of money. They don't have to, go through the roof, and I don't have to have employees, or I want to have employees, or what, you can, as long as it's legal and your customers are happy, you can kind of run it however you want. And so, you've got Paul Jarvis, and you've got, some of the other, I guess I end up looking at some of the other, sort of startup thought leaders, who, and people in the WordPress ecosystem, Pippin Williamson and whoever, who have, built businesses the way they want to, and then also stepped out, or, changed their businesses the way they want to. And I think that that's then reflected in these acquisitions too.
Yeah. And I think no matter which path you take, even taking multiple different paths along your career, your journey, you learn something different each time. And I think that that's valuable regardless of whether you sell or not, or sell for a lot or sell for a little. You're always learning something different along that process. As we get to the top of the hour here, I kind of just want to wrap up and ask you both, if you have, let's say, these GoDaddy Pro meetups are mostly for professionals that are building sites for other folks, agencies and freelancers, maybe some developers. If any of those demographics are looking to sell their business or product, what kind of advice do you have for them? What kind of practical things should they be doing? How far ahead should they be planning? That kind of thing. Is there anything that you would do differently now, knowing what you know, just to give, a little bit of advice to anybody watching and listening along with us here, if they are interested in selling? We'll start with you, Cory.
Reiterating what we've talked about, I think the organization is a big deal. It certainly made my second sale easier than my first, and both of them were pretty easy, where, because I had dedicated accounts, from bank accounts all the way down, separate Stripe Gmail account, separate Mailgun account, separate yada yada. It just made it so much easier to turn over the keys. The other thing would be to start documenting early, even if it's just for yourself. But, that way you're not, because one of the things that I felt I dropped the ball on selling the birdie was having to sit down and like, okay, now I've got to get all of this out of my brain and into a Google Doc, for this poor non-technical buyer. And the documentation could have been a lot better and a lot more thorough had I thought ahead.
And I'll let you wrap us up, Becca, with your advice. What do you think people should be thinking about, and how far ahead should they be thinking about those things if they are, interested in selling their business?
I think you should always be thinking about it, right? And I would say that, again, going back to what we said sort of towards the beginning, keeping your business in a saleable state often leads to a better business, right? And so I'd say that I would encourage folks, if you know that you'd be open to selling at some point, maybe make that a quarterly thing you revisit for yourself. If I were going to try to, or maybe, twice a year, right? If I were going to sell my business, what are the rough edges I need to polish out? What do I need to do, right? So always grow your business like you would sell it, even if you're not interested in it. And I'd say that for the folks who again are working for a pro audience, who are building sites for clients or doing client work, do seriously consider then how you would explain the revenue or valuing your business to someone else, because that's going to help you then just understand how to have those conversations better, right? But then B, to also like improve what you're doing and think about your revenue differently. And that's really the best advice I could give, and how you would get the best valuation for your business, but also then to continue just running a good business, right? Think about, how do you systematize revenue? How do you keep that revenue reporting clean? We just talked to, Karen's question in the chat. If you're going to have different kinds of revenue, think about separating them out into different, business entities so that you can sell both at the same time or one or the other, right? I think that sort of just thinking about your business hygiene, for lack of a better word, and cleanliness of how you report revenue, how you structure it, and how you grow. It's just good business, and it's good prep for a sale.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really great advice.
Always have t-shirts.
And always have t-shirts on yeah.
Before I wrap us up, where can people find out more about you, what you're doing, or any of that stuff, Becca?
Yeah, just keep an eye on GoDaddy Garage, right? A lot of the products we're launching and working on, we're getting more active on posting there. And otherwise, you can follow me on Twitter. It's BEKA_RICE. I'll drop it in the chat too. But we got a lot of really, really cool stuff coming for WordPress at GoDaddy over the next, 4 to 6 months. I think people are going to really like.
Awesome. And how about you, Cory?
People can find out a bit more about me at gelform.com, GELFORM.com. That's kind of me as a freelancer, a one-man agency, but also I am writing more and more about building SaaS apps using WordPress as a framework. And then my the current plugin that I'm growing, Social Link Plugins, is also listed there.
Awesome. I will make sure that all of those make it into our notes for the event as well. So there'll be links to that underneath the video at the event where you're registered. And also I'll make sure that those get sent out with the email with the replay of this event. So everyone will have links to all of those things. I'll go ahead and wrap us up. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Next week, we have a chat with some folks from Sakuri, hosted by Courtney Robertson. She'll be chatting with them next week, same time, same place, about just WordPress security in general. Again, that's March 30th at 3 p.m. Eastern next week. To register for this or any other future events, head to events.godaddy.com. And you can also catch any of the past event replays there as well, or on our GoDaddy Pro YouTube channel. That's it for us. Thank you, Becca and Cory, for joining me and sharing about your experiences.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for attending, folks.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you at the next meetup. Bye.